A strong and wise woman has been cast into the shadows due to the prejudices of the Egyptian court. When Pharaoh Seti, an arrogant ruler accustomed to always getting his way, makes her the centerpiece of a wager, neither of them suspects that this game will change their lives forever. What begins as mockery turns into a dangerous challenge when he realizes that Nahit is unlike any other woman in the court, and she discovers that beneath his mask of authority and pride lies a man capable of loving with an intensity she never expected. The golden sun blazed across the expansive courtyards of Thebes, casting long shadows behind the towering columns of Pharaoh Seti's palace. Inside the cool alabaster-walled throne room, laughter echoed as goblets clinked with sweet pomegranate wine. The air hung heavy with perfumed oils and the scent of fresh lotus blossoms that adorned every corner of the vast chamber. "My lord Pharaoh," called out Amenhotep, the high priest, his voice carrying a hint of mischief unusual for a man of his stature. "You claim to be all-powerful, yet you've never faced a true challenge." His jeweled fingers gestured toward the gathered nobles, who nodded in agreement, their coal-lined eyes glinting with amusement. Seti's broad shoulders straightened on his throne of gold and lapis lazuli. At 32, he was in his prime, handsome, strong, and accustomed to having his every desire fulfilled without question. His dark eyes narrowed as he studied the faces of his courtiers. "A challenge, you say?" Seti's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. He stroked the royal beard that hung in a perfect braid adorned with gold thread. "What sort of challenge would satisfy your curiosity, Amenhotep?" The courtiers exchanged glances, some hiding smiles behind painted fans. It was Vizier Ramos who stepped forward, his thin frame draped in the finest linen, embroidered with symbols of his high office. "Perhaps, Divine One, a challenge of the heart," Ramos suggested, his voice silky with implication. "Any woman in Egypt would gladly warm your bed. But would you take as wife one whom the court has deemed unworthy?" A hush fell over the assembly. Challenging the pharaoh's matrimonial choices bordered on treason, yet the wine and festive atmosphere had loosened tongues that would normally remain respectfully silent. Seti leaned forward, intrigued rather than offended. "Unworthy? In what manner?" "There is one," whispered Lady Nefertari, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Nahit, daughter of the royal astronomer. She has been rejected by every noble family as a potential match for their sons." "Ah yes," another voice chimed in, "the woman with the sharp tongue and sharper mind. They say she speaks to men as though she were their equal." Laughter rippled through the crowd, though some of the older women exchanged knowing glances, their expressions less amused than contemplative. "Bring her to me," Seti commanded suddenly, silencing the chatter. "Let me see this woman who has your tongues wagging like marketplace gossips." The court fell silent, stunned by the unexpected command. It was Lady Tai, grandmother to the pharaoh himself, who finally spoke. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her headpiece, but her voice remained steady. "Grandson, this jest goes too far. Marriage is sacred, blessed by the gods themselves. It is not a matter for wagers and amusement." Seti's expression softened momentarily as he regarded the elderly woman who had helped raise him after his mother's early death. But the challenge had been issued, and the blood of conquerors ran hot in his veins. "It is decided," he declared, rising to his full height. Golden anklets clinked as he descended the 3 steps from his throne. "I shall take this Nahit as wife for 1 full season of the Nile's flooding. If she proves as difficult as you claim, the court shall witness my triumph in taming her spirit. If not," he shrugged, a gesture that sent ripples through his royal collar, "then I have gained a docile wife with no effort at all." The vizier bowed low, hiding his smile. "As you command, Divine One, the arrangements shall begin immediately." As the court dispersed, whispering excitedly about the unprecedented wager, only Lady Tai remained, her aged eyes filled with concern. "You play with fire, Seti," she murmured, too quietly for others to hear, "and with a woman's heart. The gods may not look kindly upon such sport." Seti merely laughed, placing a kiss upon his grandmother's wrinkled forehead. "The gods gave me Egypt to rule as I see fit. Surely they won't begrudge me this small amusement." In the astronomer's quarter of the palace complex, Nahit sat cross-legged on her roof terrace, tracking the movement of stars with a bronze astrolabe. Unaware of the dramatic change about to upend her carefully ordered life, she recorded calculations on a fresh sheet of papyrus, her brow furrowed in concentration. The night air was cool against her skin, a blessed relief from the day's oppressive heat. Unlike the court ladies with their elaborate wigs and heavy jewelry, Nahit wore her natural hair in a simple style that framed her face. Her features, though striking, did not conform to the current ideals of beauty, her nose too prominent, her frame too tall and angular rather than softly curved. "The stars are especially clear tonight," she murmured to herself, making another notation. "Sirius rises earlier than last year. The flood will come soon." A sudden commotion below drew her attention. Torches illuminated the courtyard, and the voices of royal guards echoed against stone walls. Nahit's heart quickened. Royal guards never came to the astronomer's quarter at night unless something was terribly wrong. "Father," she gasped, hurrying down the narrow staircase to find her aging parent. She found him already at the door, his expression bewildered as the captain of the royal guard delivered his message. By order of divine Pharaoh Seti, first of his name, living embodiment of Horus, Nahit, daughter of royal astronomer Senenmut, is to present herself at the palace at first light tomorrow. She is to bring nothing but herself, as all she will need shall be provided by the royal household. The guard avoided meeting Nahit's widening eyes as he continued. She is to be prepared for the marriage ceremony that shall take place at midday, when Ra is at his highest point. "Marriage?" Nahit's voice cracked with disbelief. "There must be some mistake. The pharaoh doesn't even know me." The guard finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable beneath his ceremonial helmet. "There is no mistake. The Divine One has chosen. To refuse would be—" He left the threat unspoken. As the guards departed, Nahit turned to her father, whose face had gone ashen in the lamplight. "What game is this?" she whispered, her mind racing to make sense of the incomprehensible summons. Her father shook his head slowly, eyes clouded with worry. "I know not, my daughter, but when Pharaoh commands, even the stars must obey." Throughout the night, Nahit paced her small chamber, alternating between rage, confusion, and a tiny, unwelcome flicker of curiosity. Why her? What could the god-king of Egypt possibly want with an astronomer's daughter, known more for her intellect than her beauty or docility? As dawn's first light painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink, she gazed out her window at the palace that dominated the city's skyline. Somewhere within those massive walls, a man she had never met was preparing to claim her as wife, a man worshipped as a living god who could order her execution with a flick of his wrist should she displease him. "So be it," she whispered, squaring her shoulders as the royal litter approached to carry her to her destiny. "If this is a game, Pharaoh Seti, then know that I too can play." The royal palace buzzed like an overturned beehive. Servants scurried through corridors, arms laden with exotic flowers and ceremonial vessels, while priests chanted preparation rituals in the temple annexes. The news of Pharaoh Seti's impending marriage had spread faster than desert wind, leaving a wake of astonishment and indignation. An astronomer's daughter, with no royal blood? Lady Meritaten's painted lips curled in disgust as she adjusted her elaborate wig. "The court has reached a new low. Next we'll be bowing to kitchen slaves." Her companions tittered behind jeweled hands, but fell silent as the imposing figure of Lady Tai approached, her walking stick tapping a warning rhythm against the polished limestone floor. "Mind your tongue, Meritaten," the elderly woman warned, her voice carrying the weight of her years at court. "The pharaoh's choice is divine will, regardless of whom he selects." "But surely, esteemed lady," ventured a younger noblewoman, "even divine will must respect the traditions. This Nahit, they say she argues with men as though she were their equal. They say she refuses to paint her face or wear proper wigs. Some even whisper she reads forbidden texts from foreign lands." Lady Tai's eyes, cloudy with age but sharp with wisdom, narrowed. "In my day we measured a woman's worth by her strength, not her silence." With that, she continued her slow procession toward the inner chambers, leaving a chastened group behind her. Meanwhile, in the royal preparation rooms, Nahit stood stiffly as a dozen handmaidens swarmed around her like dragonflies over the Nile. They bathed her in milk and honey, applied fragrant oils to her skin, and attempted with increasing frustration to dress her hair in the elaborate style befitting a royal bride. "Please keep still, my lady," pleaded the chief handmaiden, trying once more to arrange Nahit's thick, unruly hair into submission. "I am not your lady," Nahit replied, wincing as a comb caught in a tangle, "and I fail to see why my natural hair must be hidden beneath that monstrosity." She gestured toward an ornate wig displayed on a wooden stand nearby. The handmaidens exchanged alarmed glances. One leaned close to whisper, "The priests will not approve." It is tradition for royal women to— The priests do not have to wear it, Nahit interrupted, rising from her seat with sudden determination. Her tall frame towered over the attendants, her eyes bright with defiance. If the pharaoh wishes to marry me, he will marry me as I am, not some painted doll dressed to please the court. A horrified silence fell over the chamber, broken only when the massive cedar doors swung open to reveal High Priest Amenhotep. His expression darkened as he took in Nahit's unadorned appearance. "This is unacceptable," he declared, his jeweled fingers clutching his ceremonial staff so tightly his knuckles whitened. "The marriage ritual begins in 1 hour, and the bride stands before me looking like a common field worker." He turned to the attendants. "Dress her properly, even if you must force the wig onto her head." Nahit's chin lifted. "Try it, Holy One, and discover how sharp an astronomer's stylus can be when wielded in defense." The priest's face purpled with rage. "You dare threaten me? Do you not understand your position? You are nothing but a pawn in a game between great men." The words hung in the air, exposing a truth Nahit had suspected since receiving the summons. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "What game, exactly?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Tell me why the divine pharaoh suddenly desires a wife he has never met." Amenhotep's momentary expression of guilt confirmed her suspicions before his features rearranged into practiced piety. "The Divine One's choices are not for us to question. Unless those choices involve me refusing to play dress-up to satisfy your precious traditions," Nahit countered, folding her arms across her chest. A new voice, deep and resonant, cut through the tension. Perhaps a compromise might be reached. All heads turned to find Vizier Ramos standing in the doorway, his painted eyes taking in the scene with calculated interest. "The bride may keep her natural hair," he suggested smoothly, "but adorned with the royal diadem to symbolize her new status." He gestured to a chest carried by a servant, who opened it to reveal a breathtaking headpiece of gold and turquoise. "And," Ramos continued with silky emphasis, "she will wear the ceremonial robes and cosmetics as tradition demands. Some battles may be won, my dear, but waging war against all our customs will only ensure your swift defeat." Nahit studied the vizier, recognizing the shrewd intelligence behind his affected manner. This man was dangerous, more so perhaps than the blustering priest. "A reasonable suggestion," she conceded finally, knowing when tactical retreat served better than outright rebellion. "I accept your compromise." Relief washed over the handmaidens' faces as they resumed their preparations with renewed purpose. As they worked, an older servant leaned close to Nahit's ear. "Be careful, child," the woman whispered. "The court is like the Nile in flood season, beautiful to behold but deadly for those who cannot navigate its currents." "I've spent my life mapping stars and predicting celestial movements," Nahit replied quietly. "I can learn to chart these waters too." The woman's weathered face creased in a subtle smile. "Perhaps you can. It has been many seasons since these halls witnessed a woman with fire in her heart." When Nahit finally emerged from the preparation chambers, she presented a striking figure, neither fully conforming to tradition nor completely defying it. Her natural hair framed her face, but was crowned with the royal diadem. The ceremonial robes draped her tall frame elegantly, though she had refused the excessive jewelry that would have weighed her down like chains. As she was led toward the great temple where the ceremony would take place, whispers followed in her wake. Some courtiers stared with undisguised contempt, others with morbid curiosity. A group of noble wives huddled together, pointing and snickering behind painted fans. "Look at her, as graceful as a giraffe in a pottery shop. They say she speaks Greek and can calculate eclipse patterns. Unnatural for a woman. Poor Pharaoh, to be saddled with such a wife, even for a season. I give it a month before he sends her back to stargazing." Nahit held her head high, pretending deafness to the barbed comments. Inside, however, her mind raced. "A game between great men," the priest had said. A wager, perhaps? Was she merely the forfeit in some court amusement? The thought burned like desert sand against bare skin. All her life, Nahit had fought to be valued for her mind in a world that prized women only for beauty and obedience. Now, it seemed, she had become a curiosity, a temporary diversion for a bored king and his sycophants. As she approached the temple entrance, sunlight glinted off golden statues of gods and goddesses. A honor guard of soldiers flanked the path, their expressions carefully neutral beneath their helmets. One, however, caught her eye. A captain, perhaps, older than the others, with lines of wisdom etched around his eyes. As she passed, he gave her the slightest nod of respect. That single small gesture strengthened her resolve. Game or not, wager or divine whim, she would face whatever came next on her own terms. If Pharaoh Seti expected a meek bride or an easy conquest, he would soon discover his mistake. The massive temple doors stood open before her, releasing the scent of incense and the sound of ceremonial drums. Somewhere inside, a man she had never met waited to claim her as wife. A living god, if the priests were to be believed. A spoiled monarch playing at matchmaking if her instincts proved correct. Drawing a deep breath, Nahit stepped forward into the shadowy interior. The coolness washed over her skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she made out the imposing figure standing before the altar of Amun-Ra, his back to her, shoulders broad beneath a mantle of gold and precious stones. Pharaoh Seti, son of Horus, lord of the two lands, turned slowly to face his bride. Their eyes met across the incense-filled chamber, and in that moment, something unexpected passed between them. A current of recognition, a spark of challenge. For the first time since receiving the royal summons, Nahit felt a flutter of something besides anger and indignation, something dangerously close to curiosity. The temple of Amun-Ra hummed with tension. Hundreds of oil lamps cast dancing shadows across hieroglyph-covered walls, while incense smoke curled upward like serpents reaching for the heavens. Nobles and priests had arranged themselves in precise formation, creating a human corridor through which Nahit walked with measured steps. The ceremonial music, sistrum rattles, drums, and reed flutes, seemed to match the rapid beating of her heart. At the altar, Pharaoh Seti stood motionless, a living statue adorned with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. His kohl-rimmed eyes, dark and unfathomable, tracked Nahit's approach with the intensity of a desert hawk spotting prey. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30 summers to her 25, with the chiseled features that royal artisans faithfully reproduced on countless temple walls. As Nahit reached the designated spot beside him, she performed the expected deep obeisance, though she rose more quickly than protocol dictated. A ripple of disapproval moved through the assembled courtiers. High Priest Amenhotep cleared his throat pointedly before beginning the sacred invocations. Great Amun-Ra, Lord of Truth, Father of the gods, Maker of men, Creator of all things, we stand before you to witness the union of your divine Son, living Horus Seti, with this woman chosen to be his great royal wife. The priest's emphasis on this woman carried undisguised disdain. Nahit's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze fixed forward. Do you, embodiment of Horus, take this daughter of Egypt into your divine household? The priest continued. I do, Seti responded, his deep voice resonating through the temple chamber. When Amenhotep turned to Nahit, his expression suggested he expected, perhaps hoped for, some impropriety on her part. Do you, daughter of the astronomer, accept the divine blessing of becoming wife to the living Horus, to serve him with obedience and devotion, until Anubis calls you to the field of reeds? The temple fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed upon her face. In that moment, Nahit considered what defiance might cost her and her aging father. The game, whatever it was, had already begun. Better to play along while she discovered its rules. I do, she answered, her clear voice carrying to the farthest corners of the temple. The ceremonial portion concluded with the exchange of symbolic gifts, a golden ankh from Seti, representing life, and a small alabaster jar of sacred oil from Nahit, representing fertility and devotion. As their fingers brushed during the exchange, Nahit noticed the pharaoh's slight start of surprise, as though he had not expected her touch to be warm and human. Following tradition, the newly joined couple proceeded to the temple's innermost sanctuary, a place normally forbidden to all but the highest priests and the pharaoh himself. Here, away from the court's prying eyes, they would receive a private blessing before the sacred statue of Amun-Ra. As the heavy cedar doors closed behind them, leaving them alone save for two silent priests who remained at a respectful distance, Nahit released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The air in the sanctuary hung heavy with centuries of prayers and offerings, the massive gold-covered statue of Amun-Ra gleaming in the lamplight. So, Seti spoke finally, his voice different here, less formal, more curious. You are the stargazer's daughter, who has the court trembling with indignation. Nahit turned to face him fully. And you are the divine ruler who marries strangers on a whim. I wonder which of us should be more concerned. A flicker of surprise crossed Seti's face before he masked it with a smile. Bold words from a new bride, especially one who stands in the most sacred space in Egypt. Would the gods prefer honest words or pretty lies in their sanctuary? Nahit countered. If I am to be your wife, even temporarily, let us begin with truth between us. Temporarily? Seti's eyebrow arched. What makes you believe our union is not permanent? Nahit's laugh held no humor. Please, divine one, I may spend my nights studying the heavens, but I'm not blind to earthly matters. This marriage, she gestured between them, has the distinct aroma of a wager. What I haven't determined is whether I'm the prize or the punishment. For a long moment, Seti studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that seemed to surprise even the stoic priests. By Ra's flaming eye, he said, shaking his head, they warned me you were different, but they failed to mention you were perceptive as well. He moved closer, circling her as though examining a rare artifact. Tell me, Nahit, daughter of Senenmut, what does your perception reveal about me? Nahit held her ground as he circled, refusing to turn her head to follow his movement, a small act of defiance. I see a man accustomed to being obeyed without question, a ruler surrounded by those who tell him only what they believe he wishes to hear. She paused, weighing her next words carefully. I see someone who may have forgotten the difference between worship and respect. The pharaoh stopped his circling, coming to stand before her once more. His eyes had narrowed dangerously, but Nahit detected something else there too, a glimmer of intrigue, perhaps even appreciation. Careful, he warned softly. Men have been executed for lesser insults. Then perhaps you should have chosen a more conventional bride, Nahit replied, meeting his gaze steadily. One who would tremble appropriately and speak only when permitted. Perhaps I should have, Seti agreed, his lips quirking into something not quite a smile. But where would be the challenge in that? So it was a challenge then. Nahit's suspicions crystallized into certainty. What are the terms? Terms? Of the wager, she clarified, crossing her arms over her chest. If I am to be the unwitting subject of a bet between you and your courtiers, I believe I have the right to know what's at stake. A muscle twitched in Seti's jaw, confirmation enough. You assume much for someone in your position. My position as your wife grants me certain privileges, does it not? Or is that part of your game as well? To marry me in name but deny me in practice. For a heartbeat, Nahit feared she had pushed too far. Pharaoh or not, Seti was still a man with a man's pride, and she had just questioned both his honor and his intentions in the most sacred space in the kingdom. Instead of anger, however, something like respect flickered across his features. You're right, he conceded, surprising her. You deserve to know. He glanced toward the priests, then added in a lower voice, but not here. Tonight, when we are truly alone, I will answer your questions. All of them. The ceremonial gong sounded outside the sanctuary doors, their signal to return to the public celebration that would last well into the night. Before Nahit could respond, Seti took her hand, placing it formally upon his arm in the traditional pose of royal couples. Until tonight, wife, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Try not to scandalize the entire court before sunset, Leave some nobles for me to shock tomorrow. The unexpected humor caught Nahit off guard, and a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. I make no promises, husband. Scandalizing the self-important comes as naturally to me as breathing. Seti's answering laugh turned the heads of the priests who opened the sanctuary doors. The sound, genuine and unrestrained, seemed to surprise them almost as much as it surprised Nahit herself. As they emerged into the main temple, the assembled court sank into deep prostration. Only Lady Taye remained relatively upright, her aged back preventing the full bow. Her shrewd eyes moved between Seti and Nahit, noting their still linked arms and the unexpected ease between them. The feast that followed was a blur of rituals, presentations, and carefully choreographed entertainment. Nahit, seated beside Seti on elevated thrones, felt hundreds of curious eyes upon her throughout the evening. She noted the speculative glances exchanged between Vizier Ramos and High Priest Amenhotep, the barely concealed disdain from court ladies, and the calculating assessment from military officials. One face in particular caught her attention, a strikingly beautiful woman whose elaborate makeup and jewelry marked her as someone of significance. Unlike the others, she made no attempt to hide her hostility, staring at Nahit with such undisguised venom that it sent a chill down her spine. Who is that woman? Nahit asked quietly, indicating the direction with a subtle nod. Seti followed her gaze, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Isfet, daughter of General Nakmin. She has been a companion of mine for several years. A companion, Nahit repeated, understanding immediately. I see. Then I have displaced someone who believed herself secure in your affections. No one is secure in anything at court, Seti replied, his tone suddenly harder. That is the first lesson every royal learns. Hearts, alliances, even lives, all can change with a single word from me. The statement, delivered with such casual certainty, reminded Nahit sharply of the reality she now inhabited. This man, regardless of the unexpected moments of humanity he had shown, wielded absolute power over everyone in the kingdom, including her. Another lesson in humility for me, Divine One, she asked, deliberately using his formal title. Seti turned to study her, his expression softening slightly. Not humility, Nahit. Awareness. The court is a nest of cobras pretending to be harmless garden snakes. Remember that, especially when someone offers friendship too easily. Before she could respond, the ceremonial drums announced the arrival of foreign dignitaries bearing wedding gifts. The moment of unusual candor passed as Seti resumed his public persona, remote, majestic, divine. As the evening progressed, Nahit observed her new husband with growing curiosity. The man was a puzzle of contradictions. One moment the untouchable god king, the next a shrewd human with unexpected flashes of humor and insight. Whatever game had brought them together, she sensed it was already changing, evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. When the last ritual was completed, and the stars shone brightly in the night sky, the royal couple was escorted to the pharaoh's private chambers with great ceremony. Handmaidens prepared Nahit in an antechamber, removing her ceremonial attire and dressing her in a sheer linen sleeping gown before anointing her with sacred oils meant to ensure fertility. The Divine One will join you shortly, the chief handmaiden informed her with a knowing smile. May Hathor bless your union with many strong sons. Left alone in the massive bedchamber, with its ceiling painted to resemble the night sky she knew so well, Nahit paced nervously. Whatever happened next would set the tone for their unusual marriage. She needed to be prepared, alert, and, above all, true to herself. A soft knock preceded Seti's entrance. He had shed his ceremonial regalia and crown, appearing almost ordinary in a simple white kilt. Without the trappings of divinity, he looked younger, more human. Their eyes met across the lamplit chamber, the weight of mutual assessment hanging between them like an unseen presence. So, Nahit said finally, breaking the charged silence, about those answers you promised, husband, I believe it's time we discussed exactly what game we're playing and what happens when it ends. Seti moved toward the balcony that overlooked the sleeping city of Thebes, his silhouette framed against the star-filled sky. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Nahit wondered if he was reconsidering his promise to explain. When he finally turned to face her, moonlight cast half his face in shadow, lending him an air of mystery that even his divine status couldn't match. Would you like some wine? He asked, gesturing to a silver pitcher beside a pair of ornate goblets. I would prefer answers, Nahit replied, standing her ground near the center of the vast chamber, undiluted by wine or pretty distractions. A half smile curved Seti's lips as he poured himself a goblet. You're right to be cautious of palace wine. It loosens tongues and clouds judgment. He took a deliberate sip before setting the goblet aside. Very well then, answers. He approached her slowly, his movements reminding Nahit of the desert lions that occasionally prowled near the city's edges, graceful, powerful, and impossible to predict. Yes, there was a wager, he admitted, stopping a respectful distance from her. My court grows complacent and dull with their endless sycophancy. They suggested that no woman could resist my charms or challenge my will. He shrugged, a surprisingly human gesture. I disagreed. They proposed a test, and I was the test subject, Nahit concluded, her voice flat. Chosen because you are known to be intelligent, outspoken, and unimpressed by rank or title, Seti replied without hesitation. The perfect challenge, according to Vizier Ramose. The candor of his answer caught Nahit off guard. She had expected excuses, perhaps even lies, but not this simple truth delivered without apology. I see, she said finally. And when you win this wager, when you've sufficiently charmed or conquered me, what happens then? Do you discard me like yesterday's bread and return to your beautiful Isfet? Something flashed in Seti's eyes, surprise perhaps, or a flicker of guilt. The wager was for one season of the Nile's flooding, After that, you would be free to return to your father's house, with generous compensation and elevated status for both of you." "How magnanimous," Nahit remarked, unable to keep the bitter edge from her voice. "And if I refuse to play along? If I choose to be neither charmed nor conquered?" Seti stepped closer, close enough that Nahit could detect the faint scent of cedarwood and myrrh that clung to his skin. "Then I imagine you win." "Win what, exactly?" "The satisfaction of defeating the living god, the admiration of every woman in Egypt, or perhaps," he added with unexpected softness, "the chance to be seen for who you truly are, rather than merely as an astronomer's odd daughter." The words struck a chord deep within Nahit's chest. All her life she had been defined by others, too tall, too outspoken, too interested in matters supposedly beyond a woman's comprehension. The thought of being truly seen, of having her worth acknowledged regardless of the outcome, was surprisingly appealing. "An interesting proposition," she conceded, moving past him toward the balcony. The night air cooled her flushed cheeks as she gazed out over the city that now in some strange way was partly hers. "But I have terms of my own." "You're negotiating with the pharaoh?" Seti asked, amusement evident in his tone as he joined her at the balcony's edge. "I'm negotiating with my husband," Nahit corrected, turning to face him directly. "If I am to be your wife in name, then I will be your wife in truth, not in physical intimacy," she added quickly, seeing his eyebrow rise, "but in respect and position. I will not be hidden away like an embarrassing secret. I will attend court, participate in ceremonies, and be accorded the dignity my position deserves." Seti studied her with newfound interest. "You surprise me, Nahit. Most women in your position would demand jewels or promises of eternal devotion. I am not most women," she replied simply. "What I value cannot be hung around my neck or stored in a jewelry chest." "No," Seti agreed thoughtfully. "I begin to see that." He extended his hand, palm up, not a command but an invitation. "I accept your terms. For this season, you will be my great royal wife in all public matters. The court will treat you with the respect your position commands, or answer to me." Nahit placed her hand in his, sealing their private accord. His fingers closed around hers, warm and unexpectedly gentle. "There is one more thing," she added, meeting his gaze steadily. "I wish to continue my astronomical work. I have been tracking a particular celestial pattern that occurs only once every 70 years. If I miss these observations, my father's life's work remains incomplete." Seti's brow furrowed, but not in anger. "The palace has gardens where you could set up your instruments, I suppose, away from prying eyes but with a clear view of the night sky." "Thank you," Nahit said, genuine gratitude softening her voice. Whatever else he might be, Seti was proving more reasonable than she had dared hope. A comfortable silence settled between them as they stood side by side, looking out over the moonlit city. The distant sound of night birds and the gentle lapping of the Nile against its banks created a peaceful backdrop to this unexpected moment of understanding. "It's late," Seti said finally. "You must be exhausted after today's events." "As must you," Nahit replied. "Even living gods need rest, I imagine." The corner of Seti's mouth quirked upward. "Indeed we do." He gestured toward the massive bed that dominated the chamber. "It's yours for tonight. I'll use the adjoining room." Nahit blinked in surprise. "But the court expects many things," Seti interrupted gently, "not all of which need concern us in private." With that, he bowed, a gesture so unexpected from the divine ruler that Nahit momentarily lost her composure. "Sleep well, wife," Seti said, moving toward a concealed door in the wall. "Tomorrow begins your first day as Queen of Egypt. I suspect it will be memorable." After he departed, Nahit stood motionless, trying to process the bewildering turns the day had taken. She had entered the palace expecting to face a spoiled tyrant playing games with her life. Instead, she had found a man capable of surprising her, perhaps even respecting her. It was dangerous, she realized, this unexpected glimpse of humanity behind the golden mask of divinity, far more dangerous than the wager itself. Dawn arrived, with a flurry of handmaidens bearing breakfast, fresh clothing, and eager curiosity about the royal wedding night. Nahit fielded their thinly veiled questions with non-committal responses, neither confirming nor denying their assumptions about the pharaoh's prowess as a lover. "The Divine One has requested your presence in the morning audience chamber," announced an elderly official, entering after the handmaidens had completed dressing Nahit in royal finery. "This is most unusual. Typically, the great royal wife does not attend such functions until she has been formally established in the household. How fortunate that I am not typical, Nahit replied smoothly, adjusting the royal diadem that now felt marginally less foreign atop her head. The morning audience was Egypt's heartbeat, where the pharaoh heard petitions, resolved disputes, and issued proclamations that would ripple throughout the two lands. As Nahit entered the vast hall, conversations stuttered to silence. Hundreds of eyes tracked her progress toward the dual thrones at the chamber's far end. Seti, already seated and adorned in full regalia, watched her approach with an expression that revealed nothing to the court but spoke volumes to Nahit. There was appreciation there, and a hint of something that might have been admiration. "My queen," he greeted her, rising briefly as protocol demanded when she reached the dais. "Join me." As Nahit took her seat beside him, she was acutely aware of the waves of shock and disapproval emanating from the assembled courtiers. One face in particular caught her attention: Isfet, stationed among the high-ranking court ladies, her beautiful features twisted with barely concealed fury. The morning proceeded with the familiar rhythm of governance: farmers disputing water rights, merchants seeking trade permissions, priests requesting resources for temple renovations. Nahit observed in silence, studying Seti's approach to each petition. Where she had expected arbitrary decisions based on whim, she instead witnessed careful consideration and surprising wisdom. When a case arose involving a disputed astronomical prediction that affected the farming calendar, Seti unexpectedly turned to her. "My wife has expertise in these matters," he announced to the startled petitioners. "Perhaps she might offer insight." A hush fell over the assembly. For a pharaoh to publicly defer to a woman's judgment, even his queen's, was unprecedented. Nahit recognized the opportunity for what it was. A test, perhaps, but also a chance to prove her worth. Rising from her throne, she addressed the farmers with clarity and precision, explaining the celestial patterns that would indeed bring an early flood this year. "Adjust your planting accordingly," she advised. "The stars do not lie, even when their message is inconvenient." The farmers bowed deeply, their initial skepticism replaced by cautious respect. As Nahit resumed her seat, she caught Seti observing her with undisguised interest. "Well done," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You've given them practical wisdom rather than mystical proclamations. Refreshing. The heavens contain mystery enough, without humans adding unnecessary complications," she replied quietly. A smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed Seti's face for a fleeting moment. Perhaps that philosophy applies to more than just the stars. Days stretched into weeks as Nahit settled into her unexpected role. By night, she continued her astronomical observations from a private garden Seti had ordered, prepared specifically for her use. By day, she gradually began to participate more actively in court functions, her initial discomfort giving way to growing confidence. Seti, true to his word, treated her with public respect and private courtesy. They developed a routine of taking evening meals together on the palace rooftop, away from the court's prying eyes, where conversation flowed more freely than either had anticipated. "My tutors would be horrified to hear me admit this," Seti confessed one evening, reclining on cushions beside a low table laden with fruits and sweetmeats. "But I find half our religious texts incomprehensible. The priests drone on about divine mysteries that seem designed primarily to maintain their own importance." Nahit, seated cross-legged across from him in a posture no proper queen would adopt in public, laughed softly. "Careful, divine one. That sounds dangerously close to heresy." "Perhaps," Seti agreed, reaching for a fig. "Or perhaps true understanding of the gods requires questioning, not blind acceptance. What do your stars tell you about the divine, Nahit?" She considered the question seriously. "They tell me of patterns and cycles beyond our full comprehension, of beauty and order amid seeming chaos." She looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Whether that speaks of divine intention or natural law seems less important than the wonder it inspires. Seti's eyes remained on her face rather than the stars, his expression thoughtful. "You speak of wonder as though it were as essential as bread or water, isn't it?" Nahit challenged gently. "What separates us from the beasts, if not our capacity to look beyond immediate needs and glimpse something greater?" A comfortable silence fell between them as darkness enveloped the palace. Servants approached with lamps, but Seti waved them away, preferring the simple companionship of starlight. "I begin to understand," he said finally, his voice unusually reflective. "Why the court found you so threatening." Nahit turned her attention from the heavens to the man beside her. "And why is that?" You refuse to be awed by that which does not deserve awe, Seti replied. You see through the gilded masks we all wear to the human beneath. It's unsettling and strangely freeing. The admission, offered without pretense, touched something in Nahit that she had been carefully guarding, a growing appreciation for the complex man behind the divine title. In these private moments, without the weight of the double crown upon his brow, Seti revealed himself to be thoughtful, surprisingly curious, and possessed of a dry wit that matched her own. It was dangerous territory, this gradual shift from wary opponents to something approaching friendship. More dangerous still was the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, or how she sometimes caught herself watching his hands, strong and graceful, as he spoke. The season of flooding will end soon, she reminded herself and him, breaking a silence that had grown too comfortable. Our arrangement has a finite duration. Seti's expression shuttered slightly, the openness of moments before giving way to something more guarded. Indeed, he agreed, rising from his cushions with sudden formality. And I have duties to attend to before morning. Good night, Nahit. As he departed, leaving her alone beneath the canopy of stars, Nahit wrapped her arms around herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Foolish woman, she whispered to herself. Remember the game you're playing, and with whom. Yet later, as she lay sleepless in her chambers, Nahit could not deny the inconvenient truth taking root in her heart. What had begun as a royal amusement, a game between powerful men with her as the unwitting pawn, had evolved into something far more complicated. She was beginning to care for Seti, not as pharaoh, living Horus, or divine ruler, but as the man who listened to her theories about celestial movements with genuine interest. The man who laughed at her irreverent observations about stuffy court rituals. The man whose rare, unguarded smiles had begun to feel like private treasures. And that, Nahit realized with growing dismay, had never been part of the plan. The royal barge glided across the Nile during the festival of Opet, with nobles gathered under dyed linen canopies while musicians played softly at the stern. Nahit stood at the rail, watching shoreline villages pass by. 3 months had transformed her from reluctant bride to respected queen, with evenings increasingly spent in Seti's enjoyable company. You appear deep in thought, my queen, said Vizier Ramos, approaching with a courtly bow. Does the Nile not please you? I was merely reflecting on how quickly time passes, Nahit replied carefully. Ah, yes, the season of Akhet nears its end. Ramos's painted eyes narrowed slightly. Soon the floodwaters will recede, leaving new soil for planting, and perhaps new arrangements at court as well. The implication hung between them. Nahit maintained her composure, despite her quickening heart. All things have their season, Vizier. That is the way of Ma'at. Indeed, though I observe our divine ruler seems changed since your arrival. He consults priests less frequently, questions ancient traditions, includes a woman in matters previously reserved for men. Ramos's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened. Some find these changes concerning. Progress often concerns those most comfortable with the past, Nahit countered. A commotion from shore interrupted them as they approached a temple to Sobek. Seti joined Nahit at the rail as Ramos departed. You were speaking with Ramos, Seti observed quietly. I hope he wasn't troubling you. He made it clear certain elements at court are anxious for what they consider the restoration of natural order, Nahit explained. Meaning your departure and my return to more conventional choices, Seti concluded, jaw tensing. The palace was stagnant, not harmonious. Sometimes disruption is exactly what's needed. His hand covered hers on the rail, a public gesture court observers would note. Besides, I find I've grown accustomed to your particular brand of disruption. The warmth of his touch sent a flutter through Nahit's chest. These moments had become frequent, blurring the lines of their arrangement into something neither had named. After docking, Nahit noticed a dust-streaked messenger urgently conferring with the captain of the guard, unusual enough to interrupt the sacred procession. The captain approached Ramos, speaking in hushed tones while glancing toward Seti. A gleam of satisfaction flickered briefly in the vizier's eyes. Troubling news from the capital, Ramos told Nahit with manufactured concern. Nothing that need concern you, of course. Later, as Nahit waited in the royal cabin hoping to speak with Seti, Lady Maritaten entered, clearly troubled. My queen, forgive the intrusion, but I believed you should know. The messenger came from the palace archives with documents recording a wager made before your marriage. Nahit's heart froze. A wager? Between the Divine One and his inner circle. The terms were specific, that he would make you fall in love with him before the flooding season ended. The prize was prime farming land held by several noble families. The cabin felt suddenly airless. Nahit had known of the general wager, but not these calculated terms, not the deliberate targeting of her heart. "Why risk bringing me this information?" Nahit asked. "Because I had a daughter your age who died young," Meritatan answered with compassion. "And because I've watched your dignity, your intelligence, your growing feelings for the Divine One. No woman deserves to be the unwitting prize in men's games." After Meritatan left, Nahit stood motionless, reassessing every interaction through this devastating lens. Had Seti's kindness, his interest in her work, his respect all been calculated steps toward winning his bet? Worse was realizing the strategy had worked. She had been falling in love with him. Seti entered without waiting for permission, his expression troubled. "Nahit, I must speak with you about the wager?" She interrupted flatly. "The specific terms you failed to mention? You've heard that my heart was the specific prize?" "Yes. What I want to know is whether any of it was real, or was it all calculated to win your bet?" "It began as a game," Seti admitted. "But what's grown between us? That's become something I never expected. Something profitable," Nahit replied bitterly. "Do you truly believe I care about land? I am Pharaoh. Everything already belongs to me. Then why target my feelings specifically? Because I was arrogant and surrounded by people who encouraged my worst impulses," he answered honestly. "Because I never imagined you would matter, that your good opinion would become more valuable than any sycophants, that I would look forward to our conversations more than any royal privilege." His sincerity made Nahit's heart twist, but the deception weighed too heavily. "Even if that's true, our relationship was founded on a lie, a game where I was the only player unaware of the rules," she said, gathering her dignity. "When we return to Thebes, I will move to separate quarters. I'll fulfill public duties until our agreed time expires, but our private association is ended." Seti's vulnerability vanished beneath his royal persona. "As you wish. I would not impose my company where it's unwelcome." After he left, Nahit finally allowed her tears to fall, not for the broken arrangement, but for the genuine connection she had believed was growing between them. 7 days had passed since the royal barge returned to Thebes, 7 days of brittle formality between Seti and Nahit, who had moved to the queen's traditional quarters as promised. The court quickly noted the change, whispers circulating through columned hallways. Only Vizier Ramos seemed pleased, his thin lips occasionally curving into a satisfied smile. On the 8th morning, a royal messenger summoned Nahit to an emergency council meeting. She followed him to find Seti seated at the head of the obsidian table, his expression thunderous, surrounded by the kingdom's highest officials. "Ah, the queen arrives," High Priest Amenhotep remarked with barely concealed insolence. "Now perhaps we may learn why sacred tradition must be upended at her convenience." "Mind your tongue," Seti snapped. "You stand in the presence of the great royal wife, not some palace concubine." "Divine One," General Horemheb said uncomfortably, "we mean no disrespect. But the proposal from the temple is unprecedented. To reject it could bring divine disfavor upon Egypt." "What proposal?" Nahit asked quietly. Ramos answered with measured precision. "The high priests have conducted divinations regarding the coming season. They foresee potential disaster, drought, crop failure, famine, unless proper offerings are made." "What offerings?" Nahit pressed, foreboding building in her chest. "The oracles are clear," Amenhotep declared. "The pharaoh must recommit to established bloodlines by taking a wife from among the sacred families before planting begins." The implication crashed over Nahit like a physical blow. They wanted Seti to annul their marriage. And naturally, she managed steadily, these oracles revealed themselves just as our arranged term nears its conclusion. "The gods speak when they choose," Amenhotep replied coldly. "Not when convenient for foreign-educated women who question sacred traditions." Seti slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! The oracles are a fabrication, a transparent attempt to manipulate the throne by men who resent having their authority questioned." Shocked silence fell across the chamber. Accusing priests of falsifying divine communication bordered on blasphemy, even from Pharaoh himself. "Divine One," Ramos interjected smoothly, "your devotion to the queen does you credit, but surely Egypt's welfare must take precedence over personal attachments. The priests suggest Lady Nefertari would make a most suitable great royal wife." "How convenient," Seti replied dangerously. "And I suppose Nefertari's brother, your personal scribe, had nothing to do with this sudden divine revelation. Ramos's composure slipped momentarily. "Let me be perfectly clear," Seti continued, rising from his chair. "I will not set aside my wife, not for false oracles, not for traditional bloodlines, not for political machinations disguised as religious concern." Amenhotep pushed himself to his feet, trembling. "This is unprecedented. The gods may withdraw their protection from Egypt." "Then let them," Seti replied, his voice ringing through the chamber. "If the gods are so petty they would punish an entire kingdom because its ruler refuses to discard his wife like a broken sandal, perhaps they are not worthy of our worship." Gasps echoed around the table. Such words threatened the very foundation of Egyptian religious and political authority. "Prepare the temple for a ceremony of renewal," Seti commanded. "In 3 days I will reaffirm my marriage vows before all the gods and any who wish to witness. If Amun-Ra objects, let him strike me down where I stand." After the council dispersed, Nahit remained behind. "Why risk so much?" she asked when they were alone. "Our arrangement would have concluded naturally without controversy." "Because some things matter more than political convenience," Seti replied quietly. "I have been many things, spoiled, arrogant, careless with others' feelings, but I will not discard someone worthy because tradition demands it. Is that all? Principle? You know it isn't. But I've lost the right to speak of my feelings, having begun our relationship with deception." "This ceremony is dangerous," Nahit warned. "You're challenging centuries of religious authority. All risks I'm willing to accept." "For what? A marriage that began as a wager? A queen who speaks to you only when ceremony demands?" "For the chance that someday it might be more," Seti answered simply. "For the opportunity to earn back what my deception cost us. But only if you wish it. I will announce the renewal ceremony to satisfy the council. Whether you choose to participate or use this as your exit, that I leave entirely to you." That night, Nahit stood on her balcony beneath the stars that had always guided her. The pain of Seti's deception remained, yet his willingness to challenge the very systems that granted him power spoke of something deeper than mere regret. Sometimes, she reflected, the most accurate celestial measurements came after acknowledging an initial error. Perhaps human hearts operated on similar principles. Dawn had not yet broken when Nahit slipped through the servants' entrance, a hooded cloak concealing her identity. The 2 days since the council meeting had been a whirlwind of preparations for the renewal ceremony, with priests muttering darkly and nobles exchanging worried glances. Nahit had maintained her distance, neither accepting nor refusing Seti's offer. The weight of decision pressed upon her like a physical burden until the answer came with unexpected clarity. She needed space away from the palace to hear her own heart clearly. The sacred oasis of Siwa lay 7 days' journey west, a place her father described as where heaven's reflection pools upon the earth. Its temple to Amun-Ra stood as a place of oracle, where pilgrims sought divine guidance in times of uncertainty. A loyal guard had arranged a swift horse and provisions without questions. As she led the animal through quiet streets, the eastern sky began to lighten. "Leaving without farewell, my lady?" Lady T emerged from the shadows, leaning on her walking stick. "It's not what it seems," Nahit began, then stopped herself. "No, that's not true. I'm running away. From my grandson? Or from yourself?" "Perhaps both," Nahit admitted. "I need clarity I cannot find within these palace walls." "And you believe you'll find this clarity at Siwa?" When Nahit's surprise registered, Lady Tai chuckled. "Where else would an astronomer's daughter seek wisdom than at the most ancient oracle in Egypt? Will you stop me? Or alert the guards?" "Neither. Some journeys must be taken alone." She pressed a small object into Nahit's palm, a scarab amulet etched with hieroglyphs for protection. "It belonged to Seti's mother. May it guide you back to where you belong." "Thank you. Please tell no one until midday. Safe journey, daughter of stars. May the desert speak what your heart needs to hear." Verstihades. By midday, Nahit had joined a merchant caravan, her identity concealed beneath travelers' robes. The caravan leader, a grizzled Bedouin named Akil, asked few questions. The desert reveals all truths eventually. Those who enter carrying secrets rarely leave with them intact. By the 3rd day, palace life seemed a distant dream. The simplicity of survival cleared her mind of court complications. At night, she returned to her first love, the stars. Without city lights, the heavens revealed themselves in breathtaking clarity. "You know the sky language well," observed Akil one night. "Your father was a star reader, an astronomer to the royal court," Nahit answered carefully. The The stars do not lie or scheme. Perhaps that is why you prefer their company to people. The caravan reached a minor oasis on the 5th day. Here, they would turn south while Nahit's path continued west. You cannot travel alone to Siwa, Akil warned. The deep desert is no place for solitary travelers. I must reach the oracle, Nahit insisted. Akil studied her face. My nephew heads towards Siwa with salt and spices. He leaves tomorrow. He may allow you to join for a price. Name it. I have gold enough. Gold is plentiful. Truth is rare. Tell me what drives a woman of refinement into the desert alone. Beneath the star-filled sky, Nahit shared her story. A marriage arranged through wager, trust broken and possibly reborn. A king willing to challenge traditions for a woman who kept her heart guarded. In my many years, Akil said finally, I've learned there are two kinds of storms. Those that destroy and those that transform. The same winds that can bury a caravan can also reveal ancient treasures. The question is not whether you have endured a storm, but what it has revealed within you. On the 7th day, as they crested a dune, Siwa appeared below like a green jewel in golden sand. As they descended, Nahit noticed men in the pharaoh's elite guard at the oasis edge. It seems you are not the only one from Thebes to visit our oracle, remarked the caravan leader. Nahit's heart lurched. Had Seti sent guards to retrieve her? But she saw no royal litters, just soldiers, and a single figure in simple robes speaking with temple priests. A figure whose bearing sent a shock of recognition through her. Seti himself had come to Siwa. One soldier spotted the approaching caravan. The robed figure turned, and even across the distance, she felt the moment he recognized her. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then Seti began walking toward her. Nahit dismounted and waited. When he stood before her, the mighty pharaoh looked nothing like a divine ruler. His face was wind-burned and stubbled, his eyes tired but clear. You're a difficult woman to find, he said simply. I wasn't aware you were looking, Nahit replied, struggling to maintain composure. Did you truly believe I wouldn't? Something like hurt flickered across his features. When I awoke to news of your departure, I thought. He stopped. What matters is that you're safe. How did you know to look here? I didn't. I came for my own reasons, only to find you arriving as though guided by the gods. From his robes, he withdrew a small package. Perhaps this explains the coincidence. Nahit unwrapped it to reveal a sealed papyrus. What is this? The message I intended to send with you after the ceremony, whether you chose to participate or not. Read it if you wish. I'll await your response at the temple at sunrise tomorrow. With that, he bowed and walked away, leaving Nahit holding what felt like her future in her hand. Night descended over Siwa with desert suddenness, revealing stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to touch. Nahit sat beside a reflecting pool, the sealed papyrus resting untouched in her lap. She had taken a simple room at the pilgrim's hostel, declining the undoubtedly more comfortable accommodation where Seti had established himself. You cannot sit here all night staring at sealed papyrus, she muttered, fingers tracing the royal seal. Drawing a deep breath, she broke it and unrolled the document. The hieroglyphs were not formal court script, but flowing handwriting, Seti's own hand. The lamplight flickered as she began to read, to Nahit, daughter of Senenmut, from Seti, son of Amenhotep Tsehu, not pharaoh to subject, nor husband to wife, but simply one human heart speaking to another. I entered our marriage as a fool playing a game. I believed in my arrogance that you were merely an amusing diversion. For this blindness, I have only profound regret. What I could not foresee was how your presence would transform my understanding of myself. Each conversation beneath the stars revealed a woman of such intelligence and integrity that my initial purpose became increasingly shameful. You asked once if anything between us was real. I answer now, not at first, but with each passing day, something authentic took root, unplanned and unexpected. I claim no right to your forgiveness. If you choose to leave court when our arranged time concludes, I will ensure your freedom to pursue whatever path you desire. Yet I would be less than honest if I did not confess that such an outcome would leave my life immeasurably diminished. For the truth I can no longer deny is this: I love you, Nahit, not as a king loves a convenient queen, but as a man loves a woman who has become essential to his world. The renewal ceremony I proposed is not a political maneuver, but my way of offering you what should have been yours from the beginning, a true choice made with clear eyes. A marriage based on mutual respect rather than deception. If your heart cannot find forgiveness, I will accept your decision without question, but if there remains even the smallest chance that what has grown between us might become something genuine and lasting, then I stand ready to begin again, not as Pharaoh and reluctant bride, but as Seti and Nahit, two imperfect souls seeking connection. I will await you at the temple of the oracle at dawn. If you do not come, I will understand and trouble you no more." With humility and hope, Seti Nahit read the message twice more, tears blurring her vision. These were not carefully crafted royal words, but raw, vulnerable truth, painful in its simplicity, powerful in its directness. She rose and walked to the reflecting pool. The water mirrored the stars above, creating the illusion of infinite depth. "Like hearts," she whispered, trailing her fingers through the water. "One touch and everything changes." From childhood, Nahit had found clarity in the unchanging patterns of the heavens. Stars followed predictable courses, celestial events obeyed immutable laws. But human hearts possessed no such constancy. They evolved, surprised, sometimes betrayed, but also sometimes transcended their limitations in ways logic could never anticipate. Could she trust again, knowing the risk? Could she believe that a relationship begun in deception might transform into something authentic? Her hand brushed against Lady Ty's scarab amulet. The elderly woman's words returned. "May it guide you back to where you belong, wherever that may be." Perhaps that was her answer. Not certainty. Life offered no such gift, but the courage to risk her heart again, understanding that without such risk, true connection remained forever beyond reach. Thoistit Paswa at the temple of the oracle stood upon a rocky promontory overlooking the oasis lake. Nahit approached as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern dunes, dressed simply in undyed linen, with only the scarab amulet as adornment. Seti waited at the entrance in plain garments that gave no indication of his royal status. When he caught sight of her, his neutral expression gave way to cautious hope. "You came," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I did. I read your message." "And?" The question contained volumes, an entire future hanging on her response. "Your honesty deserves equal honesty in return," Nahit replied carefully. "What began between us was wrong, a game where I was the unwitting piece. That pain cannot be erased by beautiful words, however sincere." Seti's face fell, but he nodded with resignation. "I haven't finished," Nahit continued gently. "The beginning was wrong, but endings and beginnings are sometimes difficult to distinguish. What grows in the space between, that's what truly matters." A flicker of renewed hope crossed Seti's features as she continued. "I came seeking clarity, but I've realized clarity comes from within." She placed a hand over her heart, "And my heart, despite all logical objections, speaks a truth I can no longer deny." "What truth?" Seti asked softly. "That I love you too. Not the divine Pharaoh, but the man who debates with me beneath the stars. The man who respects my mind and would challenge the gods themselves rather than discard me for convenience." Seti reached for her hands, his touch tentative. "I have no right to ask for a second chance, but if you're willing to grant one, I swear I will spend every day proving worthy of it." "Not a second chance," Nahit corrected. "A new beginning. Equal partners, seeing each other clearly without games or masks between us." Seti bowed deeply, not as a ruler acknowledging a subject, but as one soul honoring another. "I stand before you not as Pharaoh, but simply as a man who loves you and seeks the privilege of walking beside you." Nahit returned his bow with equal depth. "And I stand before you as a woman who chooses to open her heart again, knowing all that is at risk, yet believing that what might be gained is worth any price." As they straightened, the rising sun bathed them in golden light. Seti extended his hand. "Shall we enter the temple together?" Nahit placed her hand in his, feeling the rightness of the gesture settle in her bones. Together. The journey back to Thebes took 5 days, faster than Nahit's outward trek, thanks to royal resources. They traveled during cooler hours, resting in the shade of elaborate tents during scorching midday heat. Unlike formal processions that typically accompanied Pharaoh, their small party maintained deliberate simplicity. These desert days became an unexpected gift, a neutral space between past complications and whatever future awaited them. Free from palace walls and courtly observers, they rediscovered each other as simply man and woman. "I never imagined Pharaoh knew how to prepare his own meals," Nahit teased one evening, watching Seti turn skewered desert hare over a campfire. "Former royal huntmaster," he reminded her. "Before my elder brother's unexpected death made me heir, My father believed all princes should know how to survive if separated from their retinue. Such small revelations formed a new foundation between them, one based on genuine discovery rather than court-mandated roles. By the time Thebes appeared on the horizon, something fundamental had shifted. The hurt that had driven Nahit to flee had transformed into a mutual understanding that the past, while acknowledged, would not dictate their future. "Are you ready?" Seti asked as they approached the city gates. "Once we pass those gates, we return to our public roles. Will it change things between us?" "Only if we allow it to," he replied, squeezing her hand. "In public, we may be pharaoh and queen, but in private, we remain Seti and Nahit, equal partners." The royal reception was elaborate as protocol demanded. Through it all, Seti maintained proper royal bearing, but those watching closely might have noticed the warmth in his eyes whenever they rested on his queen. Word of their reconciliation spread quickly. Some received the news with pleasure, particularly Lady Taye. Others, notably Vizier Ramose and High Priest Amenhotep, greeted the development with carefully masked displeasure. "The ceremony of renewal must proceed immediately," Amenhotep insisted during council. "The Divine One's absence has already caused concerning omens." "How fortunate then that I have returned with a direct blessing from the Oracle of Siwa itself," Seti replied mildly. The High Priest fell silent, outmaneuvered. "The ceremony will proceed, but not immediately. The annual festival of the Nile begins in 3 days. The people need reassurance after weeks of rumors about conflict within the royal house. A public appearance would indeed calm such concerns," General Horemheb agreed. "Not merely an appearance," Seti clarified. "Full participation in the opening dance." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The opening dance was one of Egypt's most sacred traditions, a symbolic reenactment of the union between the river god and his consort. Traditionally performed by Pharaoh and his great royal wife, it represented not just religious devotion, but public affirmation of the royal couple's harmony and legitimacy. As the council dispersed, Nahit caught meaningful glances exchanged between Ramose and several nobles. Their return may have forestalled immediate challenges, but underlying tensions remained. "They're already plotting new strategies," she observed when they were alone later. "Let them plot," Seti replied. "They've underestimated you from the beginning, and more recently, they've underestimated us together." The morning of the festival dawned clear. From her chambers, Nahit heard the distant sounds of celebration, musicians tuning instruments, vendors calling their wares, children laughing through streets decorated with lotus flowers. "Today, all Egypt celebrates the river," Lady Tai remarked, as handmaidens prepared Nahit. "But many are equally eager to see their pharaoh and queen dance together." "There has been talk," Nahit acknowledged. "More than talk. Wagers are being placed throughout the city on whether you have truly reconciled or merely maintain appearances for political necessity." Nahit laughed. "Wagers seem to be a recurring theme in our relationship." "Indeed, though this time the stakes are understood by both participants." The royal procession to the riverfront was a spectacle. Crowds lined the route, throwing flowers and calling blessings. Nahit waved in response, still somewhat uncomfortable with the adulation, but determined to fulfill her role with dignity. "Nervous?" Seti asked quietly as they approached the ceremonial platform. "About the dance?" "No. About what it represents. Perhaps a little. Remember what I told you in the desert. The public ceremony matters for Egypt, but what passes between us in private, that's what matters for us." The ceremonial drums began, their deep rhythm matching the eternal pulse of the Nile. Priests raised voices in ancient chants. As music swelled, Seti stepped to the center and extended his hand, the gesture that would invite Nahit to join him in the sacred dance. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. This dance, this public joining of man and woman, king and queen, was more than political theater. It was an avowal, witnessed by gods and humans alike. Moving with deliberate grace, she placed her hand in Seti's. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd, followed by scattered applause that quickly swelled into approving cheers. When the final notes faded, and they stood facing each other, hands joined between them, silence fell over the crowd. Then, breaking with tradition, Seti raised their joined hands toward the heavens in a gesture of triumph and unity. The people erupted in jubilation. "I believe we've made our point," Seti murmured, his eyes dancing with rare public emotion. "So it would seem," Nahit agreed, "though I suspect certain members of the court remain unconvinced." Seti's gaze briefly shifted to where Ramose stood, with several nobles, their expressions carefully neutral. "Let them doubt. Truth reveals itself in time, like stars emerging after sunset. The metaphor, so perfectly aligned with her own way of seeing the world, caught Nahit by surprise. "You've been paying attention to my astronomical lessons." "I pay attention to everything about you," Seti replied simply. "It's one of many lessons I've learned since a certain astronomer's daughter arrived to challenge my comfortable assumptions." Later, as twilight fell and celebrations continued along the riverfront, they stood on a private balcony overlooking the scene. "Listen to them," Seti said, nodding toward the sounds rising from below. "This is what matters. Not the schemes of priests or ambitions of nobles, but the well-being of these people." "You truly believe that?" Nahit realized aloud. "I was raised to believe my divine blood made me superior, entitled to whatever I desired. You helped me see beyond those limitations, to recognize that true strength comes not from what separates us from others, but from what connects us. We have much yet to learn from each other," she said softly, "and many challenges still await us." "Let them come," Seti replied with quiet confidence. "We faced the desert and found our way back stronger. Whatever storms approach, we'll weather them together." The 7 days of the Nile festival transformed Thebes into a dreamscape of light and sound. Despite the public triumph of the opening dance and subsequent ceremonial appearances alongside Seti, something still felt unresolved in Nahit's heart. On the festival's final night, tradition dictated that the royal couple participate in the ceremony of completion, a ritual journey to the temple of Hathor, where they would make offerings for continued fertility and abundance. "The temple priestesses have prepared everything according to ancient custom," Lady Tai informed Nahit, as handmaidens dressed her in silver-embroidered blue linen robes. "Though I should warn you, this particular ritual is somewhat intimate in nature." "Intimate?" Nahit questioned. "Hathor is goddess of love and fertility. While nothing improper occurs in public view, the symbolism is unmistakable." The elderly woman's eyes twinkled with amusement. Heat rose to Nahit's cheeks. Since their return from Siwa, she and Seti had shared increasingly warm conversations and lingering touches, but had not yet resumed physical intimacy. Both seemed to recognize that such a step required absolute certainty, a final decision neither had explicitly articulated. "The ritual itself requires only symbolic gestures," Lady Tai assured her. "What follows in private is between husband and wife, but the court and priests will be watching closely. After your public reconciliation, they expect confirmation." As twilight descended, Nahit found herself aboard the royal barge, elaborately adorned with gold leaf and lotus-shaped lamps. Seti joined her at the bow, his indigo robes embroidered with silver representations of the moon's phases. "You look troubled," he observed quietly. "Not troubled, contemplative." Lady Tia explained the nature of tonight's ceremony. Understanding dawned in Seti's eyes. "I've instructed the priest to modify certain aspects. Nothing will occur that makes you uncomfortable." "Thank you," she said simply. Then, gathering courage, she added, "Though perhaps we should discuss what happens after the ceremony, when we return to the palace." Hope tempered by careful restraint crossed Seti's features. "Whatever you wish, Nahit. As I promised at Siwa, the choice is yours always." The ceremony proved less awkward than Nahit had feared. They presented offerings before Hathor's statue, followed by ritual prayers. The most intimate element came when they shared a cup of sacred wine, their hands overlapping as they raised it first to the goddess and then to each other's lips. Something electric passed between them, an acknowledgement of the decision awaiting them once public rituals concluded. "Would you join me for a final viewing of the festival from the palace rooftop?" Seti asked as they returned. The royal rooftop garden had been transformed. At its center, where they had shared many evening conversations, a new addition awaited, a small observatory platform with Nahit's astronomical instruments arranged exactly as they had been in her father's home. "When did you do this?" she asked, touching the familiar bronze astrolabe that had been her mother's gift. "While you were in Siwa," Seti admitted. "I thought you might appreciate having a proper space for your work. Your father helped ensure everything was positioned correctly." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, not a grand public display but a private acknowledgement of what truly mattered to her, spoke volumes about how far they had come. They stood side by side, looking out over the festival-illuminated city. "When I first arrived here," Nahit mused, "I felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Now, Seti prompted when she fell silent. "Now I begin to see possibilities I couldn't imagine then." She turned to face him directly, moonlight silvering his features. But there's still something unresolved between us, isn't there? Whether what we've built since Siwa is strong enough to sustain a true marriage, Seti said. Whether you can ever fully trust me again, knowing how our relationship began. In the moonlight, with celebrations surrounding them, the moment for truth had arrived. Trust is like the moon, she said, gesturing upward. It waxes and wanes. It can be eclipsed by shadows or shine with breathtaking clarity. But it follows a cycle, returning again and again if we're patient enough. Her gaze met his steadily. I believed the shadow of how we began would always darken what grew between us. But these past weeks have shown me that new light can emerge, even after the darkest eclipse. I cannot promise doubt will never return, but I can promise to remember this moment when it does, to recall that we found our way back to truth together. And what matters to you, Nahit? Seti asked softly. She stepped closer. You, us. This unexpected partnership that began as a wager, but has become something neither of us could have predicted. I am not worthy of such grace, he whispered, but I swear I will spend every day earning the trust you're willing to place in me. Not earning, Nahit corrected gently. Growing. Together. She touched his face. I choose us, Seti. Not pharaoh and queen, but man and woman, walking forward on a path we create together. The last barrier between them dissolved. Seti drew her into his embrace, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held none of their previous hesitation, a sealing of promises, an affirmation of choice freely made with eyes open to both past and future. Come, Seti said, offering his hand. It's time to begin our life together, not as the gods or court decree, but as we choose to shape it. Nahit placed her hand in his without hesitation. As they left the rooftop garden, the full moon cast their joined shadows before them. Two separate silhouettes merged into one unified form, moving forward into whatever future awaited. Despite newfound harmony with Seti, Nahit remained aware of court opposition. On Lady Taya's advice, she visited the Temple of Hathor, where High Priestess Nefertari shared concerning information. Vizier Ramos has been meeting with northern provinces, the priestess revealed. He positions himself as the voice of tradition against what he portrays as the Divine One's infatuation with unconventional ideas. Nefertari gifted Nahit an ancient heart-shaped carnelian amulet, advising that their renewal ceremony take place at Hathor's temple instead of Amun-Ra's. Here the Divine One should make a public declaration that cannot be undermined by those who oppose you. Returning to the palace, Nahit found Seti waiting in the private royal temple. He presented her with a modified diadem that had belonged to his mother, now adorned with stars representing Nahit's astronomical work. I have never spoken the words that should have been said, Seti said, kneeling before her, a shocking break from royal protocol. I love you, Nahit, not as Pharaoh loves his queen, but as one incomplete being recognizes its other half. Moved beyond words, Nahit knelt with him. And I love you, the man who makes me stronger, wiser, more completely myself than I could ever be alone. She presented him with Nefertari's amulet, completing their exchange of meaningful gifts. As they prepared to return to public duties, Nahit shared the priestess's advice about the renewal ceremony. Hand in hand, they left the sanctuary, carrying the strength of promises made not for political advantage, but from the deepest truth of their hearts. As preparations for the renewal ceremony at Hathor's temple progressed, Nahit was startled one evening by Isfet, Seti's former favorite concubine, in her observatory. I've come to offer you truth about our divine ruler, Isfet said with artificial sweetness. Did you know he made similar promises to me? He even learned star names to please me when I expressed interest in the heavens. She produced a small obsidian star pendant. He gave me this, with similar flowery declarations. I thought it interesting that he mentioned adding stars to your mother's crown when he commissioned this after I expressed admiration for the night sky. Patterns repeat themselves, great royal wife. Though reason told Nahit this was calculated to undermine her confidence, uncomfortable questions lingered. Was she truly different, or merely the latest in a pattern? That evening she confessed her concerns to Seti. There is truth in what she says, though not as she intends, he acknowledged. Before you, I moved from one relationship to another with little deep investment. That changed with you, not because you're more beautiful or entertaining, but because you challenged me to see myself clearly, to grow beyond entitled assumptions I'd never questioned. Why did she come now? Nahit asked. The timing suggests coordination with those opposing our ceremony. Isfet has connections to noble houses in Ramos's faction. That night, Seti made a surprising declaration. After the renewal ceremony, I intend to dissolve the royal harem and replace it with a royal court for women, where noble daughters and foreign princesses can serve as actual diplomats and administrators rather than decorative possessions. You don't need to do this to prove your devotion, Nahit said, deeply touched. I'm not doing it only for you, Seti replied. I'm doing it for Egypt, for a future where we draw on the full talents of all our people, not just those born male. The morning of the renewal ceremony, Seti summoned Nahit to an emergency council meeting. He wore battle attire instead of ceremonial robes, a sign of crisis. In the council chamber, General Nakhtmin sat like an accused criminal. Under Seti's fierce command, he confessed, Vizier Ramos and High Priest Amenhotep approached me 3 days ago. They proposed that during today's ceremony, a demonstration would create distraction, while guards separated the queen from the royal party, escorting her downriver. Abduction, Seti named it bluntly. Guards immediately surrounded the implicated officials. The named conspirators will be detained until investigations are completed, Seti announced. The renewal ceremony will proceed as planned. Any attempt to disrupt it will be considered treason. Later, Seti asked Nahit privately if she wished to delay the ceremony after learning of the danger. The only thing that gives me pause, she replied, is the thought of giving those who plotted against us even a moment's satisfaction. We proceed as planned. At Hathor's temple, Seti deviated from the scripted vows, addressing all witnesses. Today marks not just the renewal of my marriage vows, but the beginning of a new chapter in Egypt's history. From this day forward, the royal harem is dissolved, replaced by a royal women's court where daughters of noble houses will serve through their intelligence, not their bodies. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he continued. Women may now serve in temple administrations and government offices according to their abilities. Let all Egypt know that their pharaoh rules in partnership with a queen whose wisdom flows like the life-giving Nile through our land. As they departed, hundreds of women from every social station formed an impromptu honor guard. They understand what you've done, Nahit said, deeply moved. You've given them possibility. What we've done, Seti corrected, for I would never have seen the need without you to open my eyes. Following the renewal ceremony, Seti's revolutionary declarations regarding women's roles spread throughout Egypt. Delegations arrived daily at the palace, noble women offering daughters for the new royal women's court, female scribes seeking broader appointments, merchants' wives bringing business proposals they had previously managed behind the scenes. I never anticipated such an immediate response, Nahit told Lady Tia. It's as though a dam has broken. Preparations for Nahit's official coronation consumed weeks. Unlike their hasty marriage, this ceremony would follow all traditional protocols with unprecedented additions. Nahit would receive authority over specific domains, education, astronomy, certain temple administrations, and the royal women's court. The night before the coronation, Nahit stood in her observatory contemplating the stars. Seti joined her, sensing her thoughtfulness. Are you having doubts? He asked gently. Not doubts, exactly. More awareness of weight. Every decision we make sets precedents that will echo long after we're gone. What I've come to understand through you, Seti replied, taking her hand, is that shared burdens aren't just lighter, they're transformed into purpose to be embraced together. At the great temple of Amun-Ra, before representatives from every province and foreign nation, Seti placed the elaborate crown upon Nahit's head. I confer upon Nahit the authorities specified in the royal decree, he proclaimed. Let all who honor Pharaoh extend equal honor to his queen in these designated domains. Outside, thousands of citizens, particularly women, had gathered. When Nahit emerged crowned, a spontaneous roar of approval rose from the crowd. They see themselves in you, Seti murmured. Not as you are now in crown and ceremonial trappings, but as you were, a woman whose value was almost overlooked because she didn't conform to expectations. That night, after the celebrations ended, they stood again beneath the stars. From astronomer's oddity to Egypt's queen, Nahit mused, all because you made a drunken wager, the best wager of my life, Seti smiled, though I suspect the gods were playing a longer game than either of us realized. A fortnight after Nahit's coronation, investigations into the conspiracy continued. Most implicated parties had received their sentences. Vizier Ramos was permanently exiled with all titles and properties forfeit, while High Priest Amenhotep would be confined to a remote temple dedicated to Thoth. There remains the question of Isfet, General Horemheb reported during a private audience with Seti and Nahit. Evidence suggests she acted as messenger between conspirators. More concerning, palace servants report that she attempted to access the royal chambers with a small vial hidden in her robes. Poison cannot be ruled out, Nahit observed, chilled by the implication. The council suggests permanent service in the temple of Anubis at the necropolis, Horemheb stated. A fitting punishment, Seti remarked, then turned to Nahit. Unless the queen has an alternative recommendation, Isfet's actions were directed primarily against you. Nahit considered carefully, aware that her decision would establish precedent for how she wielded this newly granted power. I propose the temple of Sekhmet at Abydos, she replied. As goddess of both healing and plagues, Sekhmet's priestesses must master knowledge of herbs and potions. If Isfet has developed interest in such substances, let her learn their proper uses under strict supervision, channeling any destructive impulses toward constructive purpose. An unexpected solution, Horemheb commented, but Sekhmet's temple maintains strict discipline. Isfet would find no easy life there. So be it, Seti declared. Isfet will serve for a period not less than 10 years and may never return to Thebes without royal permission. The following dawn, Nahit watched from her observatory as Isfet departed in simple white robes of a temple initiate. When their eyes met across the distance, Nahit raised her hand in acknowledgement, not victory or gloating, but recognition of one woman to another. After a moment's hesitation, Isfet inclined her head slightly before turning away. Your mercy surprised many, Lady Tyre observed, joining her. Some interpret it as weakness. Let them, Nahit replied. Those who mistake compassion for weakness understand neither. Returning to her chambers one evening, Nahit found a crude clay figurine with a reed piercing its heart, a primitive curse object. Palace security immediately investigated this breach. A message sent from desperation, not strength, Lady Tyre observed as guards searched for the culprit. Days later, Nahit received a mysterious note. The figure came not from political enemies, but from within the palace household. The laundry supervisor's sister is wife to a priest who lost position in your reforms. The message, bearing a star within heart symbol reminiscent of Isfet's pendant, suggested their former enemy might now be an ally from Sekhmet's temple. Why would Isfet help me? Nahit wondered. The warning proved accurate. Rather than retreating, Nahit and Seti accelerated their reforms, turning intimidation into opportunity for more decisive action. A year after Nahit first entered the palace, they prepared for the sacred wedding ceremony, a ritual reenactment of Isis and Osiris's divine union. Unlike traditional versions emphasizing male dominance, this ceremony included reciprocal moments where Nahit bestowed blessings upon Seti, changes initiated by the newly appointed female high priestess. Unexpectedly, Hittite ambassadors arrived with a request from Queen Puduhepa to send 2 royal women to study in Nahit's women's court, acknowledging her reform's international significance. During the ceremony, Seti gave Nahit the Ankh, symbolizing life, while she presented him the Jed pillar representing stability, a public demonstration of their balanced partnership. When I think how differently this day might have unfolded, Seti reflected privately afterward, if you had chosen a conventional bride, or if I had rejected what began as mere wager, either possibility representing a profound loss we couldn't have recognized at the time. The morning after the sacred wedding, Seti and Nahit stood together on the palace balcony overlooking Thebes. The city bustled with activity, merchants opening shops, children running to temple schools now open to both genders, women participating openly in previously male domains. It's really happening, Nahit observed, watching a female scribe consulting with officials at a grain distribution point. Change comes slowly, then suddenly, Seti replied. What began as a wager has transformed not just us, but Egypt itself. Behind them, handmaidens prepared for the day's first council meeting, where they would announce the formal treaty with the Hittites, a partnership between kingdoms mirroring their own. The Nile flowed eternally onward, as Egypt entered a new era of balance and shared wisdom. Did you enjoy Nahit and Seti's journey from reluctant arrangement to powerful love? Which moment touched you most? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more captivating historical romances, and turn on notifications to never miss an upload. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinations.